Hi, this is Brent with Emotiva Audio, and today I'm going to show you how to run the EMO-Q program in your BasX processor, and today we're going to be using a BasX MC1. We'll go through the entire EMO-Q process step by step, pointing out some ways to avoid common errors, as well as show you how to go back and manually adjust your EMO-Q filter after it's already been loaded into your MC1. So here, we're going to run EMO-Q on a BasX MC1 processor. And the first thing we need to do before we even get into the EMO-Q program is we need to navigate to our setup menu and then to our speaker setup, and we have to tell the processor what our speaker layout will be that is physically connected to the processor and that matches the layout of our speakers in the room. The reason that this step is important is, first, EMO-Q does not automatically detect what speaker channels are connected to the processor. We have to do this configuration ourselves in this portion of the speaker setup menu. And so here, for this test, we're just going to run a basic 5.1 setup. I have my layout set to 5.1, and so the reason this is important is that if I had it set to say 7.1.4, but I don't actually have the 6th and 7th surround, and I don't actually have any ceiling speakers, when the EMO-Q program goes to run its test tones, it's not going to hear any response back from those channels that are missing, and it's going to throw up an error message. So it's really important that when I select 5.1 that I actually have a 5.1 setup in my space. If you have any questions about setting up your speaker layout, you can take a look at our tutorial video on configuring your speaker configuration for your BasX processor, which can be found on our YouTube channel. But for now, we'll just go through the basics. Make sure your layout matches what's physically in your room, and a quick test you can perform to make sure that your speaker assignments and connections are correct is to go to the level test adjust menu, and you may or may not be able to hear these test tones, but as you select each of your channels, you should hear a pink noise test tone playing from that speaker as you select it. And if any of the test tones either do not play when you select that channel, or they play out of the incorrect speaker, you're going to want to go back and revisit either your speaker layout you've chosen or the physical connections on the back of the processor. But for now, for factory settings, all I've done is gone in and set up my speaker layout to reflect the 5.1 that is physically in my room. And so once we verify that that is correct, we can then go to the EMO-Q portion of the BasX processor. So here I'm going to select EmoQ Calibration here in a minute, but I want to talk about kind of what's going to happen when we select that. And before I start EmoQ, I have to make sure that the provided measurement microphone is connected to the EmoQ mic jack on the back of the BasX processor. And there are a few jacks that will accept the same 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch connection. There's a trigger jack and IR jack. It's important that we use the mic jack, the one that's labeled for mic, and if you're unsure, that is the jack that is just next to the Bluetooth antenna. So the microphone jack is right next to the Bluetooth antenna. If you don't connect the mic to the appropriate jack, or the processor cannot find the mic, EmoQ will give you an error that says there's no mic found. If you verify that mic is seated in the back of the processor in the correct jack and you're still getting that error message, you may need to contact us for support, perhaps for a replacement microphone. But once we've got our microphone connected, I'm ready to start the EmoQ calibration process. The microphone should be placed before running the level and distance sweeps, which are the first part of the EmoQ program, at the main listening position at approximately ear level, pointing directly upwards towards the ceiling. This will be different than how we place the microphone for the EQ portion, but do your best to get the microphone at or near the listening position at ear level on a stable platform. You may hold the microphone during this process and kind of hold it in your hand pointing up at the ceiling, but if you're too close to the mic or your head's in the way, it can interfere with the measurement process. Even placing it like on the back of your couch on a stable platform that's close to the main listening position would be fine for the general level and distance measurements. So once I select EmoQ Calibration, it's going to initialize and load up the EmoQ program. And this process will consist of a few different sweeps where levels, distances, and EQ, or equalization, will be measured and adjusted individually. the EmoQ program will launch and quickly begin playing test tones from each of your connected speakers. If it doesn't detect the mic, it'll alert you with an error message, no speaker or mic. You should just make sure the mic is seated as we've discussed. And I'm going to kind of wait to select the EmoQ calibration because once it starts, it's going to start playing test tones almost immediately. It doesn't really give you kind of a pause or a place to hit start. It's just going to go into it. So just to give you an idea of what to expect, and so I'm not talking while it's playing those test tones, the first set of tones will be pink noise test tones that are designed to measure and adjust the relative output level of each channel. And these will start almost immediately when you select the program and it starts up. Each speaker will play a couple of different test tones of varying volume, and then it will report the dB adjustment made as it measures each channel in real time, which I think is a great feature, so you can really see the adjustments it's making for each speaker. Immediately after it takes the level readings with the pink noise, it will play test tones that sound like I call it a sonar ping, and that helps it gauge the distance that each speaker is away from the microphone based on the timing of the signal playback and the reading at the microphone from the listening position. It will report the distance measured in real time for each speaker as well. And if the MC1 does not hear a response from any of the configured speakers, then it will list out any channels that were not found by the MC1 or other BasX unit and the EmoQ calibration program. And again, this will happen if your speaker layout that is set up in the menu of the processor does not match the physical speaker layout in your room. So we just have to make sure that those match, or you will get an error message. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna select EmoQ calibration. The program's gonna load up, and then we'll hear the level and distance test tones very soon after it launches. All right, we can see it's reporting, it sees the mic. All right, and so after it completes all of the level adjustments and then calculates the distance each speaker is away from the measurement microphone, it will pause before we get to the next portion, EQ testing. After we've completed the level and distance portion of the EmoQ program, we'll get a pause before we start the next portion. And in this portion, we're gonna actually measure and correct the EQ, or the frequency response of each speaker individually. The software already has adjusted the relative output levels, and so everything should be well balanced for this test. One change that we will have to make is how we treat the measurement microphone. As opposed to the first portion where we had it pointing up at the ceiling, placed at the main listening position, for the individual speaker EQ test, we will actually hold the microphone and point it at the speaker that we are measuring. This will produce a more accurate frequency response measurement, and we want to point the microphone at the tweeter of the speaker that's playing, or at least that's how I like to think about things. And we will do this from the main listening position, still with the microphone approximately at ear level as we're aiming it at each speaker. Of course, the program will pause before we start each test so that we can kind of rearrange and point at the next speaker. And what I'm gonna do is just run my left speaker EQ. You can see it says EQ testing L. That's gonna be my left speaker. So it's telling you the speaker you're about to measure. We're gonna sit in our main listening position and just hold the microphone pointed directly at that left channel speaker. We'll see some activity in our graphs over there on the right, but I'll explain kind of what each of those mean after we have our first set of measurements here. All right, I'm ready to begin. All right, and here we have completed our first set of EmoQ equalization or frequency response corrections. And you can see it's going to say next channel R. Of course, when I'm ready there, I'll point at my right front speaker and go ahead and hit OK. But let's take a moment to look at these graphs. We have a few different curves that pop up here. We kind of see them get refined as we play multiple sweeps. And so the first graph that showed up was our red graph. The red is our measured response from the speaker with absolutely no correction applied. So that's just the raw output from our speaker. And we can see in this case we have some real odd behavior kind of down in the lower frequencies. But as EmoQ continues to play the multiple test tones to EQ each speaker, we'll also get a green curve. The green curve represents just the corrections that are made in each of the 11 EQ bands for that speaker. We'll talk a little bit more about the green curve and what it means when we go back at the end and go look at how we can adjust manually these corrections. But really more importantly, we see the blue curve, and you may have even noticed that the blue curve kind of showed up and then was, as more sweeps were played, it kind of was refined and kind of, narrowed down. Well, EmoQ is playing a series of sweeps, getting the baseline measurement with the red curve. It's then continuing to play a couple of additional sweeps with incremental equalization applied as it kind of works its way down as from the most important points that need correction to the kind of finer details of the equalization. And so we see that blue curve kind of refined as it goes through the sweeps. And so at this point, we're just going to run through our right front channel and just kind of pay attention to what those curves are doing as they're produced on the graph with each sweep. I think you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Right, so there we could fairly clearly see the refinement of our EmoQ curves, both the correction curve and the resulting blue measurement curve kind of changing as more sweeps were run and more information was collected by the EmoQ program. So at this point, we're just going to run through the rest of our channels in our 5.1. And then after this, we'll talk about how to make sure we save and apply our EmoQ settings. And then we'll look at how we can get back into EmoQ to make some manual adjustments, which I think is one of the better features of this room correction. All right, and of course that last one was our subwoofer, and we see that most of the response is down there in the lower frequencies. And at this point, we have a few options. Once we've run through all of our EQ for all of our speakers, we want to make sure to hit apply here, right? Apply is what is going to save this set of EmoQ filters to the EmoQ selection within your equalization options. Of course, at this point, we can quit and leave the EmoQ software, or if we want to, we can hit View. And when we hit View, it may take it a second to load up, but it's going to give us some options here. We can view EQ, and I can go and view the EQ for any of my speaker channels. Of course, I can select this and change between my speakers, or if I hit my viewer here, I can just view my level adjustments that were made. And here we can see the dB adjustments that were made for each speaker. And outside my subwoofer, everything was already pretty close, just because my speakers are about the same sensitivity. And if we go back and look at our distances, you'll find that the distances are very, very accurate. My microphone was, I just kind of approximated the middle of the room, but you can even see from left to right, the front and the surrounds, that we have some really good symmetry there. And if you double check that with a measuring tape, you would find that it's very, very close to the actual distance. So, at this point, we can go and view all those things. I've already applied, and so we'll just quit and leave the EmoQ program. And at this point, our EmoQ filter is completed. And before we get back into where we can kind of look at our results and make some manual adjustments, I want to show you kind of where this EmoQ filter lives and how you can select it or deselect it. If we go to the Setup menu, we'll be under EQ Setup. And of course, since we ran EmoQ, it's now selected as my default equalization. Of course, EQ Bypass, if we want to just get rid of any EQ and just listen to the system flat, we'll select EQ Bypass. And then, of course, these EQ 1, 2, and 3, these are manual equalization filters that you can put in. At any one time, we can only store one EmoQ filter under this selection in our equalization setup portion of the menu. And so that's where it'll live and how you can select or deselect deselect it. And I can even get in here at this point and make adjustments to each of the bands. And I think that's really cool that, you know, you can go in here and make adjustments. But I'll show you kind of the, I think, even better way that we can go back and make manual adjustments to our EmoQ after we have run a filter. Because we can do it where we actually see the real-time graphical representation. So if you select EmoQ Calibration again here, it's just going to run you through the same full set of tests and produce a completely new filter that, if you apply it, will overwrite the existing EmoQ in the processor. But if we select individual test, I can go back and I can just choose to rerun the level and the distance test and save the EQ that I already did in my first filter, or I can choose to, you know, leave the levels and distances alone and just rerun the EQ portion of EmoQ, which I think is a great, you know, feature to where you don't have to run the whole thing. You know, if you just want to run a section of it, you can do that. I'm going to get into the EQ test portion because here I'm not going to run these sweeps again, but here I want to show you how you can not only view all of these graphs again, but you can make manual adjustments to any of the 11 bands that were produced by EmoQ to adjust to your liking. And so first, you know, this menu at the bottom, I can of course just reset the EQ for, here I have my left channel selector. I can just hit EQ, reset, and wipe it out. I can run a sweep of the speaker again without any EQ applied. So, you know, we'll kind of get that red, you know, result again because that's our result with no EQ. Or I can run the sweep again with the EQ applied. You know, if you were using like an external program like REW or something to test, you know, you could run them with and without the test or something. Or if I hit auto test, it's just going to go into and redo the equalization for that speaker. But I'm not going to redo it. We'll get a very similar result in the same room, same place. So instead, I want to look at how we can navigate up to these bands and kind of point out what each of these different parameters mean on the graph that we see to the right. And I think this left speaker will be a pretty good you know, example case here. And so first I'll note that the three parameters we have are FC stands for the center frequency at which the adjustment is applied. And if I look, this is around, this band 1 is around 99.6, we'll call it 100 hertz. And if we look at our graph, we can see at 100 hertz, on my green graph, I get a very strong peak, and it looks like it's peaking up to about +10, or, you know, if I go to my gain over here, 11.3 decibels. And so each of these bands corresponds to one of the peaks or valleys that you see on your green correction curve. And we can find, you know, which band goes with which part of the curve by looking at that center frequency where the peaks and valleys occur. And so I see, you know, just for example, I see a valley, it looks like at a little bit under 1 kilohertz. And again, these are not in numerical order. These are in order of importance of the adjustment. Basically, you know, we see that the first one was that big peak up there at 100 hertz. That's on the first sweep. You know, it's doing the most impactful adjustments. Then on the subsequent sweeps, it's kind of filling in some of these lesser adjustments. So here, 862, I think that's going to be my cut by around 5 dB, just below 1K. And so, you know, if I want to, I can continue lowering. If I select this option, I can continue lowering that peak, right? I can make an adjustment to my green correction curve. And what you'll notice is you get kind of a fourth curve in there. It's almost like a yellow or off-white curve. And, you know, if I actually apply this adjustment that I'm making, you know, of course I wouldn't want to go this extreme in you know, actual practice, the new yellowish curve is showing me what the new resultant output would be from the speaker if I go in and manually make that adjustment to the green curve. But I'm going to go and put this back to, it was negative 4.9, I'll put it back to around -5, and we see it's back where it needs to be. So the gain, you know, the FC, the center frequency, helps you find, you know, where those different adjustment bands occur. The gain is the amount of cut or boost applied there, and the Q, which is a common you know, parameter used for adjustments here. This references the width of the adjustment, and you'll notice that if I go up in Q value, my adjustment actually gets narrower. Let me find one that's a little bit easier to see. I'll go back to my first one. All right, so I'm back up at my I'm back up at my first filter because here we can more clearly see, just because this is a large adjustment there around 100 hertz, we can more easily see the kind of effect the Q has. If I lower the Q, we can see that green peak getting wider and wider, and of course it's then affecting a greater area around there, which we may or may not actually want. And so I'll put it approximately back to where it was. But if I go higher, we see that green peak getting narrower and narrower, so it's having less of an effect on the surrounding areas, which I probably don't want. In general, I found that the EmoQ filter really does automatically with its bands a really good job of at least picking out the most important adjustments that need to be made. In this case, you can see that big dip at 100 hertz, right? It's applied a nice big adjustment there. And of course, where we roll off, I think just due to kind of the room we're in, it's done a big adjustment there in the high end. Some of that is exaggerated on purpose for this video due to just the way we kind of have things set up so you can really see those adjustments. And of course, at this point, after I've kind of looked at and messed with any of my parameters, I like doing it in here because I can really see the effect on the graph. I can select any of my channels. Of course, I need to highlight it in red, and then use the up and down arrows to kind of cycle through the channels. And for any of them, if we go to my center, just as another example, I see a big dip, kind of the most extreme dip there at in between 200 and 500 hertz. And so if I wanted to locate that adjustment, I may look at number 2 here. And again, they're kind of ordered in the priority of how important the adjustment is. And so I see that big dip there at 373. That's going to be this valley here we see going down there. And we can see, of course, the adjustment again. If I wanted to, I could go to my Q and kind of expand or contract that peak so that it has a wider effect with a lower Q value or a narrower effect with a higher Q value. But I'll get back close to default because that was about as good as it's going to get with that blue curve there. So at this point, when we make these adjustments, there's no real need to do anything else until we just hit the back arrow to get out of EmoQ. I can confirm, this is basically saying, do you want to save any of your adjustments? If you just got in there and played with it and didn't want to save any, you just hit no, but I'll go ahead and save those adjustments I made. And so, that shows you effectively how to run EmoQ and how you can go back into the individual test portion, in particular the EQ test, and make those manual adjustments to all of the bands. And of course, we could just run, our individual level and distance tests if we wanted to, just to not have to run the entire equalization again. And so at this point, our EmoQ filter is completed. We've looked at some of the adjustments that were made, perhaps made some manual adjustments. Again, we can go to our EQ setup, and anytime we want to turn off EmoQ, we can just go to EQ bypass or select one of our 3 manual filters. But other than that, we are done with EmoQ on our BasX MC1 processor. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope this video was helpful in guiding you through the EmoQ process. From everyone here at Emotiva, happy listening.